Hello everyone, the following video is for the master's degree on English teaching or in Spanish and its official name, Maestría en la Enseñanza del Inglés, for the subject Psicolingüística 1, Adquisición de la Lengua. Of course, my teacher's name is Diana Francisco Ortega and my name is Gloria. The title of this video is From Native to New Voices, the influence of L1 on L2. And I'm going to be explaining how the first language affects on the learning and acquisition of a second language. But first, I made explain my general overview, which is composed basically by important concepts, how first language affects learning, common barriers of learning a new language, classroom challenges, teaching strategies, pedagogical implication, and of course, a conclusion, what I conclude from the reading and from the material I've been observing through this week. Well, yeah, important concepts. English as a second language, ESL, and English as a foreign language, EFL. These are two very different cases of learning. The first one, ESL, it's more centered on an environment where English is actually spoken and where the learner with the student is in constant exposing it himself themselves to an authentic input, which means he's listening to what others are talking, he's watching maybe all their context surrounded and by English. And of course there exist opportunities of communication, not only but people who are surrounded them, but also for the social media, for the news, and etc. And of course the other one is the English as a foreign language. uh, Basically this is an environment where English is not put in, which means maybe the first language is Chinese, Spanish, Korean, and they are only get to learn English through classes and not other things. And in this case, thus, in this case, uh, the first language one it interferes strongly on the EFL context because they are surrounded by their first language their first language, and they're trying to learn a second language, so it becomes more difficult. I did some relation between the acquisition and the ESL and the learning with the EFL. Why acquisition? As I understood it, is something that we here is something that we do for communication, a passive learning from podcast and naturalization of the language. So basically, it's like chat. So basically, it's like children. Uh, how it is made the acquisition. I mean, they do not study grammar. They only listen. They tend to watch maybe movies, maybe some things on their school books, words, etc. So they naturalize their language. Unlike the learning, which is basically hard to learn, the acquisition of grammar, and it tends to be boring for students to the analysis of the language. So grammar is very hard. So I make this connection with one another because in the ESL, basically you acquire the language, like on the other one. And in the English as a foreign language, you have to learn because you are not surrounded by the language. So this leads me to the other topic, which is how first language affects learning. I must say this helped me to understand me and my classmates back then when I was in college, and now it helped me to get how I can help my students. So for this, I decided to decompose this subtitle in more little subtitles, which are the following. So we have How does L1 affect on the learning of a second language? First of all, we have pronunciation, which basically the learner tries to transfer his or their natural sounds, their natural patterns from L1 to L2. For example, we have accents like Sofia Vergara, Eugenio Derbez, even mine, and it leads to accent or mispronunciation. Even it leads to some people not get what you're saying. That this is an important perspective of mine. Accents are not are not wrong. They're just accents. They just show from where people are coming. So it's not bad at all as long as you can be understood by others. But basically, that's what happens with L1 on L2 with pronunciation. The second one, of course, it's grammar. Basically, we as students try to transfer the grammar structures from our natural language to the language target. It influences structures, conjugations of verbs, and of course, it confuses the learner. For example, in English, it's always necessary to to talk about a noun. We have to mention the noun. Uh, like in Spanish, we can just say "está bonito." Yes, but in English, it's like "uh huh." So, what are you talking about? Who are you talking about? A dog, a person, your boyfriend. I don't know. So that's an example. The third one is vocabulary, with the topic of false friends, which is sounds. There are words that sounds like similar on first language and on the second language, but it's totally different. For example, the meaning of actually and currently. Actually, it's something like really, and currently, it's something that is happening right now. And the syntax of in word order. Basically, we follow our patterns of the first language or root patterns, and we try to uh, transfer it to the second language, and this affects the fluency and naturalness. For example, the order of adjectives in English are opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and purpose. For example, my pretty tiny chubby Asian dog versus my chiquito bonito. In English, in Spanish, it could be perfectly understood and it doesn't matter at all. But in English, it would be like, or my small pretty dog. And it sounds weird. It doesn't sound natural. So the third topic is common barriers of learning a new language. Basically, all of them is related to not having naturalized the language, which is negative transfer. Again, the transferring of rules from the root to the new language, and the fossilization, which is when a student cannot develop anymore their skills in English. Also, is the limited input and practice and the affective factors. Of course, all of these interferes on what we are learning, because if we are not surrounded and immersed with the language, we cannot learn it at all. I mean, yes, we can, but we do not acquire naturally, and it becomes very very difficult. So these are some classroom challenges in this case of the learning of a new language. Basically, overuse of L1 in classes. We have all been, I think, in media schools, in junior high schools in Mexico, which is, of course, the teacher tries to explain the topic, the teachers try to teach, but we are still making our comfort zone the first language. So we use it very often. And then are the error correction. These causes not distinguishing between hearers and uh, thus not making us able to correct it. Also, diverse language linguistic backgrounds. In this case, it is when multilingual classrooms are involved and all students have different backgrounds. For example, when in a classroom are Asians, are Latins, are Europeans, and etc. And of course, motivation and exposure. It is hard to learn a new language because you must have discipline. You must be motivated, otherwise you won't learn. If the student isn't motivated, then he won't learn at all. We can see it in children, we can see it with grown-ups. So it needs to be motivated maybe by something personal, because nothing is more stronger than something personal. Well, the pedagogical implications, I mean, these are the situations we as professors find in the classroom. So what can we do? Basically, pedagogical implications. Which actions we can take, like actually we can really take. First of all, of course, the analysis of the first language, a center analysis, and not trying to replace the first language, but using it as a tool. And by this, we can anticipate typical errors by using of course or analysis. Also, it is very, very important providing an exposure, I mean, at least in classes, of to the English through media, through interactions, and also to motivate the students to go more, to go beyond the classroom. For example, we can recommend it him. I don't know, well, maybe watching movies in English or in the child language, listening to podcasts, etc. And little by little, they will create their own input. Also, of course, creating supportive environments and focusing on communication. This means, of course, correcting them, but not taking the mistakes as something bad, but as an opportunity of learning, of acquisition of what we are trying to make, and focusing on make them feel less anxious, make them feel comfortable, and of course, not only centering grammar. I mean, it's important. It is highly important because we have to know how to construct a sentence, but we also have to know the importance of how we can do to adapt to different contexts and to make them lose the shame of talking. Well, finally, my conclusions. Uh, After reading all these situations, after watching the videos, I could understand that L1 deeply influences on the L1 acquisition in different aspects: pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. And L1 must be used as a tool, of course, in taking this interaction as an opportunity of communication and opportunity of learning. Also, the with the topic of acquisition and learning, I think it is, I conclude that it is important to recognize that people are different and there are different processes. So maybe someone is more comfortable learning, but at some point that person will need the acquisition, or it could be different. Maybe you are learning, and you are having your acquisition, and you may learn how to use the grammar properly. So it depends also on goals, on lives, on what you want to do, in on your own process. So I think both for grown-ups are very important process that may not be skipped, but maybe reinforced with what we have and what the student needs. So yes, this was my presentation, and it was my video. Finally, it is important to be surrounded by the language, and this really helped me to understanding myself, my classmates back then when I was in college, and my future students.